On January 31st, 1992, NBC conducted a telephone survey asking American citizens who they thought killed President John F. Kennedy. NBC received 30,000 calls in 3 hours. 51% said the CIA did it. In 1967, only one man said the CIA did it, Jim Garrison.
Lee Harvey Oswald killed no one at all. So the point is, it wasn't a question of being alone or with anybody. He had nothing to do with the assassination.
I had the impression, both before and after the assassination, that Jim Garrison was an absolute nut.
John Kennedy was killed by a major force. The simplest way to describe it is a Central Intelligence Agency. I was burned so many times that I stopped giving interviews. In other words, if the words ended up in print, they were twisted in an indescribable fashion. If they were for TV, repeatedly the editing resulted in an absurdity. So I reached a point where I concluded it would be almost useless to try and communicate my position, and I was tired of being harassed.
Jim Garrison was elected to his first term as New Orleans District Attorney March 3, 1962. Garrison was the first independent, non-politically aligned district attorney ever elected to that office. He was 43 years old, almost 4 years younger than President Kennedy. Unlike Kennedy, Garrison had little money with which to campaign. But like Kennedy, he had an appealing, straightforward presence on television. He was a former fighter pilot, FBI agent, assistant DA, a father, and had a devoted wife. When he took office, he immediately began closing down the city's illegal pinball operations and bordellos. His actions so outraged state judges who had ignored these vice operations, they moved to cut off his funds for such raids. Garrison immediately began openly criticizing the actions of what he called these 8 sacred cows. The 8 judges were so outraged by his comments, they filed suit to shut him up. In one of its most cited rulings to date, the Supreme Court upheld his right to criticize public officials. In 5 years, Jim Garrison would be criticizing public officials again, this time about the assassination of John F. Kennedy.
The case as it stood was a winnable case. It's a rather long story about how the government managed to tear it to pieces like a mad dog.
On March 1st, 1967, 5 years after taking office, Jim Garrison stunned America, and especially New Orleans, when he arrested prominent New Orleans businessman Clay Shaw and charged him with conspiracy in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Garrison accused Shaw of being one of the CIA agents who had helped set up Lee Harvey Oswald to be the patsy in the killing of John F. Kennedy.
He completely believed that his case would never that his case would be stopped, that it would never get to trial, either because of his death or for some other reason.
If Garrison had succeeded in proving that Shaw was one of the ringleaders and that Shaw was connected with CIA, he would have pulled the plug on the conspiracy, which then immediately causes the public to drop the Oswald idea. If you've got a conspiracy, you've got more than one man up in a window with an old gun, and they would have stared in the face the great big letters, W-H-Y. Why was the president killed?
I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear
that you will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
In January of 1961, John F. Kennedy was sworn in as the 35th President of the United States by Chief Justice Earl Warren. John Kennedy inherited the office of President from Dwight D. Eisenhower. He also inherited a foreign policy that would put him on a collision course with the military establishment and the CIA. America was at the height of the Cold War. Since the nation was at peace, the Cold War military actions were covert and conducted by the CIA, whose director was Allen Dulles. Under President Eisenhower, the CIA had had a successful and relatively free hand in implementing American Cold War foreign policy.
In 1953, a few CIA people managed to make some changes in Iran that President Eisenhower liked very much. In 1954, a few of us in Guatemala made some changes that seemed almost without effort.
When President Kennedy took office, he was immediately forced to confront and make decisions on two plans already implemented by the CIA. One was Vietnam, where Eisenhower had already committed nearly 15,000 military personnel, called advisors. The other operation inherited by the president was the CIA's plan to overthrow Cuba's Castro.
First, I want to say that there will not be, under any conditions, an intervention in Cuba by United States Armed Forces.
In spite of the new president's reluctance to invade, the CIA convinced Kennedy that their anti-Castro Cuban brigade landing at the Bay of Pigs would immediately cause a popular uprising in Cuba, leading to the overthrow of Castro. The Bay of Pigs was a disaster.
Many of the participants in the Bay of Pigs were on that landing force because I had known them personally.
Some in the agency mistakenly blamed President Kennedy for the loss, claiming he failed to provide proper air support.
There were people in the agency who loved Jack Kennedy, but not in this particular Bay of Pigs sector. And that's where the rabid people are.
Detailed discussions are not to conceal responsibility, because I'm the responsible officer of the government.
The president, publicly embarrassed by the Bay of Pigs, blamed the agency.
He fired Allen Dulles, longtime director of Central Intelligence, General Cabell as deputy. And it's interesting to recall that General Cabell was brother of the mayor of Dallas at the time President Kennedy was killed.
And John Kennedy's words when he fired him were roughly along these lines, that if this were England, I would have to go. But this is America, and you have to go. Well, General Cabell never forgave him for that, especially for causing the end of a brilliant intelligence career. And you can't help but feel that that's not totally irrelevant to the subsequent events when John Kennedy attempted to drive in an open car through the town where General Cabell's brother was mayor.
A presidential study of the CIA's Cuban activities compelled Kennedy to try to curtail the agency.
The National Security Action Memorandum number 55, dated, I believe, in about early July of '61, and it began with this line. He said, I hold the Joint Chiefs of Staff to be as responsible for advice to me in peacetime as they are for advice in wartime. Well, that positive statement just shook up the establishment, because it meant that Kennedy was going to shatter the CIA in 1,000 pieces.
Not the exclusive property of Republicans or Democrats.
The president also ordered the withdrawal of the nearly 15,000 advisors in Vietnam.
This caused rising feelings among the industry. They felt that here's this enormous potential, and we're not going to realize it.
The gulf between Kennedy and the CIA has widened almost irreparably.
The increasing conflict between President Kennedy and the CIA over Vietnam was reported by Arthur Kroc on the front page of the New York Times on October 3rd, 1963. It said, twice the CIA flatly refused to carry out instructions from Ambassador Henry Cabot Lodge brought from Washington because the agency disagreed with it. The CIA's growth was likened to a malignancy which the very high official was not sure even the White House could control. If the United States ever experiences an attempt at a coup to overthrow the government, it will come from the CIA. The agent